May 28, 1940. Inside the grand halls of the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin, Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring placed a report on his desk with open disdain. The document before him described President Franklin Roosevelt's bold appeal to the United States Congress, an appeal to expand American aircraft production to an unprecedented capacity of 50,000 planes per year. Göring's contempt was immediate. "The Americans are desperate," he scoffed to his staff. "They believe such propaganda will frighten us. Let them try to convert their automobile factories. They will soon learn that building warplanes requires more than assembly lines." But Göring's arrogance blinded him to a quiet revolution already underway. In Detroit, a Danish-born immigrant named William S. Knudsen, formerly president of General Motors, had accepted Roosevelt's call to service for a token salary of $1 per year. His mission: to transform America's vast industrial base into the world's most powerful engine of war. Within 4 years, this transformation would eclipse every projection. The United States would not merely reach Roosevelt's target of 50,000 aircraft annually, it would nearly double it, producing close to 100,000 planes per year, while simultaneously supplying 2 global fronts separated by oceans. The declaration that stirred Göring's derision had come on May 16, 1940, even as German panzers stormed through France. Standing before Congress, Roosevelt declared, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Skepticism rippled through Washington and London alike. In 1939, the United States had produced only 3,611 military aircraft, and the Army Air Corps owned a meager 1,700 combat planes, many already obsolete. Yet Roosevelt demanded a 14-fold increase, a feat that seemed beyond imagination. The man chosen to accomplish it, Bill Knudsen, brought with him the mastery of modern mass production. When presidential advisor Bernard Baruch was asked who could possibly achieve such a miracle, he replied simply, "First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen." Knudsen abandoned his $300,000 a year salary to serve his adopted homeland, determined to apply Detroit's automotive genius to the aircraft industry. Under his direction, America's peacetime factories began a metamorphosis unmatched in human history. By December 1941, the results were already astounding. U.S. factories were turning out 2,000 military aircraft per month, a 20-fold increase in just 2 years. New plants were rising across the nation. Ford announced an enormous bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded in Seattle. Douglas Aircraft hired tens of thousands of new workers. The so-called arsenal of democracy was awakening. Germany's leaders, however, dismissed these developments as fantasy. Their contempt was rooted in both racial ideology and willful blindness. General Friedrich von Boeticher, the German military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, had sent repeated warnings to Berlin describing the scale of American mobilization. In December 1940, he cabled home, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights." Berlin ignored him. Hitler ranted about what he called American degeneracy, rather than listening to intelligence. "The Americans," he sneered, "are half Judaized, half negrified, incapable of sustained warfare." This ideological arrogance would prove fatal. German intelligence continued to misread every sign. When Luftwaffe agents reported women entering aircraft factories, they took it as a symbol of desperation, not strength. They could not conceive that a democratic nation's mobilization might outpace the efficiency of totalitarian command. Reports of factories running 3 shifts a day were dismissed as exaggerations. Nazi ideology simply could not accommodate democratic reality. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Willow Run project embodied American ambition on an epic scale. Construction began on April 18, 1941, on farmland west of Detroit. By its completion, it was the largest factory in the world under a single roof, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching a full mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, promised to build one B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, at a time when other plants required an entire day for a single aircraft. The early results were disastrous. The first bomber, completed in September 1942, had to be rebuilt from scratch. Quality control failures reached nearly 50%. Critics mocked the facility as Will It Run, rather than Willow Run. By February 1943, the factory was producing only 56 bombers per month, far below expectations. But the engineers persisted. They broke down the B-24's staggering 488,193 parts into manageable subassemblies, designed hydraulic riveting tools, prefabricated wiring harnesses, and moving assembly lines that could adapt to hundreds of design changes. The progress was relentless. By September 1943, Willow Run was producing 148 bombers per month. By December, 365. And in April 1944, production reached its zenith, 428 bombers in a single month, one every 63 minutes, running 24 hours a day. That single factory now outproduced the entire German aviation industry. The first hints of this industrial onslaught reached German pilots during the Tunisia campaign. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commander of Jägerschwader 77, noted in December 1942, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. Most disturbing of all, there are more of them every day." By January 1943, the tide was unmistakable. On the 27th of that month, the United States launched its first bombing raid on Germany itself, 64 bombers striking Wilhelmshaven. By October, during the infamous Black Thursday raid on Schweinfurt, the U.S. could lose 60 bombers in a single mission and replace them within 2 weeks. For Germany, the mathematics had become inescapable. From February 20th to 25th, 1944, during Big Week, the U.S. 8th and 15th Air Forces mounted 3,500 bomber sorties targeting Germany's aircraft industry. The Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters, but, more critically, around 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. General Adolf Galland reported grimly to Göring, "Germany was losing 1,200 fighters per month, while producing only 1,000. America, by contrast, was producing 2,500 fighters each month and losing only 400. One of Germany's top aces, Major Heinz Bahr, described a January 1944 mission over Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By that year, the reality was clear. The production war had already been lost. American factories were now outbuilding, out-equipping, and outsustaining the Luftwaffe by margins that no strategy could overcome. By 1943, the full might of America's industrial awakening was visible in steel, smoke, and sound. What had begun as an improbable challenge had become a roaring symphony of production. Across the continent, thousands of factories, once devoted to cars, refrigerators, and farm equipment, now forged the instruments of global liberation. American aircraft production reached a tempo that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. In that single year, factories produced 86,000 aircraft, among them 25,000 bombers and 30,000 fighters. This was not merely an increase in volume, but a transformation in capability. The United States was building faster, better, and smarter than any industrial power in history. At the center of this revolution stood Ford's Willow Run plant, the heart of Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy. By the spring of 1944, it had become more than a factory. It was a symbol of national determination. Its 1-mile assembly line moved beneath skylights that bathed the factory floor in daylight, illuminating endless rows of women and men who worked side by side, around the clock. The process was relentless. A bomber every 63 minutes, day and night, as America's production machine hit full stride. This single plant now produced more bombers than all of Germany's aviation industry combined. Each completed B-24 Liberator rolled off the line gleaming and ready, its twin tails symbolizing the twin fronts the United States now fought upon, Europe and the Pacific. The contrast between the two industrial powers could not have been greater. German intelligence, still trapped in ideology, refused to believe what their own reports showed. Luftwaffe analysts dismissed Willow Run's production figures as propaganda. Others scoffed at the sight of women working the assembly lines, interpreting it as a sign of desperation. They could not comprehend that democratic participation was a force multiplier, not a weakness. Inside Germany, reality was crumbling. Supply chains faltered, labor shortages mounted, and Allied bombing disrupted what little central planning remained. Yet, in America, production increased every month. The statistics of 1944 told a staggering story. That year alone, the United States produced 96,270 aircraft, including 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine aircraft. In that single year, America built more aircraft than Germany did during the entire war, an output of 94,677 planes. The numbers, however, told only part of the tale. American aircraft carried superior armament, technology, and durability. A single B-17 Flying Fortress bristled with 13.50 caliber machine guns, radar-guided bomb sights, and advanced navigation systems. German fighters, by contrast, often launched with partial ammunition loads and malfunctioning radios. By May 1944, Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle was producing 16 B-17s every day. The Douglas Aircraft Company, which had employed just 68 workers in 1936, now commanded a workforce of 167,000 across 9 facilities. North American Aviation produced 500 P-51 Mustangs each month, while Lockheed's assembly lines turned out a P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, each incorporating thousands of field-driven design improvements. The surrounding industries kept pace. General Motors produced 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard built 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, giving Allied fighters and bombers the range and power to dominate every theater. Alcoa's aluminum output increased sixfold. Dow Chemical's magnesium production exploded from 6 million pounds a year to 333 million. The United States had become a superfactory, a nation converted into motion, its furnaces glowing day and night. Perhaps the most profound transformation occurred not in steel or oil, but in people. America's workforce had changed forever. In 1941, women made up less than 1% of aircraft industry employees. By 1943, they comprised 65%. More than 310,000 women in aircraft manufacturing alone. At the Douglas plant in Long Beach, more than half of the 41,000 employees were women. Among them was Rose Monroe, the real-life Rosie the Riveter, who drove 3,000 rivets per shift with 99.5% accuracy. These women, many of whom had never held industrial jobs before, now built the planes that carried freedom across the skies. Female inspectors reduced defect rates from 3.2% to 0.3%. Engineers redesigned tools for smaller hands, inadvertently increasing efficiency for all workers. Lighter pneumatic drills reduced fatigue, while re-engineered workstations decreased injuries. Far from weakening production, women made it stronger, proof that inclusion was not a concession, but a competitive advantage. German intelligence utterly misread this phenomenon. A captured Luftwaffe report dismissed female workers as temporary stopgaps, predicting imminent quality collapse. Instead, precision improved. The Nazis saw desperation. The Allies saw determination. Meanwhile, the Reich's own industrial system was collapsing under pressure. Göring, increasingly desperate, launched the Jaeger program in February 1944, ordering the dispersion of aircraft production into 729 underground facilities, many operated by slave labor. The most infamous of these, the Middlework Complex, employed 60,000 prisoners under horrific conditions. 20,000 would die there from starvation, disease, and execution. These underground factories, meant to preserve production, instead produced chaos. Components were sabotaged, transportation between sites was disorganized, and quality control vanished. At its peak, the entire Middlework complex produced fewer engines per month than Ford's single Chicago plant. As Germany sank deeper into misery and delusion, American innovation accelerated. Boeing pioneered modular B-29 superfortress construction, dividing production among 4 facilities with parts that were perfectly interchangeable. Each pressurized B-29 cost $65,000 and incorporated technologies Germany could not match, even in prototypes. By early 1945, the United States was producing 100 B-29s every month. Machines capable of reaching Tokyo, powered by engines made in Ohio, wings built in Kansas, and fuselages assembled in Washington. The culmination of this industrial crescendo came on June 6, 1944, D-Day. The invasion of Normandy was not merely a triumph of strategy or courage. It was the tangible expression of industrial supremacy. The Allies launched the operation with 11,590 aircraft. Germany could respond with only 319 sorties. The ratio 36-1 was not just air superiority, it was industrial annihilation. Between January and May 1944, Allied bombers dropped 145,000 tons of explosives on German targets, more than the entire Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the entire war. Transport aircraft alone delivered 3 airborne divisions in a single day, using more planes than Germany's entire transport fleet possessed across the war's duration. By that December, single raids involved 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustang had by then become the Luftwaffe's nightmare, fast, long-ranged, and seemingly inexhaustible in number. German pilots nicknamed them Indians, for they seemed to appear everywhere at once. Unstoppable, unrelenting, unending. As defeat closed in, even the most fanatical Nazi leaders began to confront the truth. Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary in December 1944, "Göring's promises about Luftwaffe superiority now seem criminal delusions. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, briefing his staff before D-Day, conceded grimly, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for everyone we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they land, they will come with such material superiority that no position can hold." The truth had finally dawned. Too late for the Reich to change its fate. The war that Hitler's ideology had unleashed was now being decided not by ideology, but by arithmetic. By the closing months of 1944, the truth was unmistakable, even within the walls of the Reich Chancellery. Germany was being crushed not only by Allied bombs but by mathematics itself. The industrial balance had become apocalyptic. For every German fighter destroyed, the Americans produced 2 replacements before the week was out. For every bomber lost, new ones rolled off the lines of Willow Run, Seattle, and Fort Worth with mechanical precision. In December 1944, as the Ardennes offensive faltered, Joseph Goebbels wrote despairingly in his diary, "Göring's promises about Luftwaffe superiority now seem criminal delusions. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Even Hitler, who once dismissed America as a nation of mongrels, began to understand the truth. In January 1945, he told Albert Speer, his armaments minister, "We should have listened to B-24's reports. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Speer himself later testified that American bombing had cut German production catastrophically, reducing tank output by 35%, aircraft by 31%, and truck production by 42%. The American attacks, Speer admitted, which followed a definite system of assault on industrial targets, caused the breakdown of German armaments. Even Germany's most advanced wonder weapon, the Me-262 jet fighter, could not alter the outcome. The sleek, twin-engine jet was 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft, a technological marvel years ahead of its time. Göring and Hitler believed it could restore air superiority, even in the face of overwhelming numbers. But the miracle never came. Germany built only 1,430 Me-262s in total, with rarely more than 200 operational at once. The jet's engines required complete overhauls every 10 flight hours. Shortages of critical materials forced the use of inferior alloys, causing frequent mechanical failure. Pilots lacked training. Airfields were bombed before they could launch. Across the Atlantic, American engineers were already experimenting with jet propulsion of their own. The Bell P-59 Aerocomet was a modest success, but Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, a superior design, entered production before the war's end. The difference was stark. Germany had to gamble its future on a single prototype. America could afford to develop several simultaneously. Industrial depth gave the United States not just quantity but options. It was the same pattern repeated across every front. Germany's factories, dispersed and enslaved, were no match for America's integrated networks of cooperation and adaptation. The middlework complex, meant to save German production, instead symbolized its moral and material collapse. Of the 60,000 prisoners forced to work there, 20,000 died. Engines assembled by starved laborers failed midair. Parts were deliberately sabotaged. Transportation between dispersed sites caused endless delays. Quality fell below combat requirements. Meanwhile, the United States was perfecting not just production but coordination. Boeing, Douglas, and Consolidated had developed a fully modular system of construction. Each section of a bomber could be built in a different state and assembled with complete interchangeability. IBM punch card systems tracked millions of components across thousands of suppliers. The War Production Board oversaw 184,000 companies, synchronizing them into a single organism. By early 1945, American production stood at its zenith. Each month, U.S. factories were producing more than 8,000 aircraft, including 100 B-29 Superfortresses, each a technological marvel that could fly higher, faster, and farther than anything in the German arsenal. The difference revealed itself most vividly on June 6, 1944, D-Day. That single invasion required an air armada of 11,590 Allied aircraft. Germany could muster only 319 in defense. The ratio 36-1 was a monument to industrial disparity. Between January and May, Allied bombers dropped 145,000 tons of explosives on German targets, eclipsing all the tonnage the Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the entire war. On that day, America's industrial machine was no longer a theory, it was airborne. Transport planes delivered 3 airborne divisions within 24 hours, using more aircraft than Germany had ever owned. In the skies above Normandy, the P-51 Mustang, powered by the American-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, hunted the remnants of the Luftwaffe with ruthless efficiency. German pilots, once the masters of the sky, now faced impossible odds. Major Heinz Bahr, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, described a mission over Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By late 1944, Göring could no longer deny the truth. Captured Luftwaffe reports warned that America was producing 5 times as many planes as Germany and could replace every loss in days. Göring's bluster gave way to disbelief. When U.S. forces captured him on May 8, 1945, the Reichsmarshal still clung to pride in German technology. At the interrogation facility in Augsburg, he declared, "Our technology was superior. We were defeated by numbers, not by ability." But as weeks passed and data was shown to him, that illusion dissolved. Transferred to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, a holding site for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, Göring underwent intense interrogation. Major Kenneth W. Heckler conducted extensive interviews in July 1945, documenting Göring's gradual acceptance of reality. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted, "but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak. It was incomprehensible." He was particularly struck by America's logistical capability. "You supplied armies 5,000 miles from your homeland," he marveled. "We could not supply forces 500 miles from Germany." At Nuremberg, prosecutors confronted Göring with the statistics of his own defeat. Charts showed that by 1944, the United States produced more aircraft each month than Germany produced in an entire year. Films of Willow Run's assembly lines played as prosecutors listed the German cities destroyed by bombers from that single factory. During his testimony on March 14, 1946, Göring confessed, "I believed the economic and technical potential of the United States to be unusually great, particularly the Air Force. But I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible." Prison psychologist Gustav Gilbert later noted Göring's fixation with production statistics. He would calculate ratios again and again, Gilbert wrote, comparing single American factories to entire German outputs. He was especially obsessed with Willow Run. He called it, "that damned factory that broke our backs." When shown the figures, 812,615 American aircraft engines versus 241,675 German, Göring fell silent. The numbers needed no commentary. They were the mathematics of defeat. By the war's end, the transformation scale was beyond precedent. In 1940, America had built 3,611 military aircraft. By 1945, the total reached 295,959, 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 transport and reconnaissance planes. It was not just quantity. It was systemic superiority, production processes that were faster, more flexible, and more reliable than anything the totalitarian state could match. At the height of the effort, more than 2 million Americans worked in aircraft production. Men and women of every race, creed, and background. This was not a mobilization by coercion, but by conviction. Citizens volunteered, adapted, and excelled. The same factories that once built sedans now built symbols of freedom. The result was not only the defeat of fascism but the birth of a new kind of power, industrial democracy. A power that proved cooperation could outbuild command, that freedom could outproduce tyranny. The Third Reich had unleashed a war of ideology. America answered with the quiet thunder of assembly lines. In the spring of 1945, as Germany lay in ruins, its surviving leaders were gathered for interrogation. Among them was Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, once the supreme commander of the Luftwaffe. Now, in a prison cell stripped of rank and illusion, he was forced to confront the arithmetic of defeat. At first, Göring clung to the rhetoric that had sustained the Reich: claims of betrayal, excuses about resources, fantasies about secret weapons. But the documents told another story. When Allied interrogators placed before him the raw statistics of American industry, the mask began to crack. He was shown a single chart comparing the production of bombers. Germany, 15,000. The United States, 97,000. Another showed fighter production. Germany, 63,000. The United States, 99,000. A third revealed aircraft engines, 241,675 German to 812,615 American. Each line on each chart represented not just machines, but the human and industrial energy of an entire society in motion. Göring stared at the figures in silence, then finally murmured, "It was not men we lacked. It was the world." His interrogator, Major Kenneth Heckler, later recalled that moment vividly. Göring was proud of the Luftwaffe's skill, Heckler wrote, but when he saw how much material the United States could create, he understood that technology and courage alone could not save a nation that had lost control of its production. At Nuremberg, the lesson was laid bare for the world to see. The judges were not merely trying men. They were also exposing the consequences of a system that placed ideology above reason. When Göring took the stand, he tried to justify the war as a contest of willpower. But when confronted with American manufacturing records, mile-long assembly lines, conveyor belts of Liberator bombers, millions of workers forging wings and engines, he was forced to admit that it was not will that failed Germany. It was the refusal to understand the nature of modern power. "I knew the United States had great capacity," Göring said under oath, "but I never imagined it could be mobilized so completely. In 4 years, they achieved what would have taken us 20. To his captors, Göring compared Willow Run to a weapon mightier than any bomb. "That factory," he said quietly, "destroyed the Luftwaffe without firing a shot." The testimony became part of the historical record, an unintended epitaph to the age of total war. For the first time in history, a nation's ability to produce, rather than merely to fight, had decided the fate of continents. In the aftermath of victory, the United States stood transformed. Its industrial empire, once born of necessity, now powered an era of prosperity. Wartime factories converted back to civilian production, yet their scale and efficiency remained unmatched. The assembly lines that had once produced B-24s and P-51s now turned out cars, refrigerators, and homes. The statistics of peacetime mirrored those of war. Between 1945 and 1950, the American economy doubled in size. The same logistical genius that had supplied armies across oceans now supplied the consumer revolution. Mass production became the foundation of the modern middle class. But the war's industrial miracle had done more than win battles. It had rewritten the very idea of what a free society could achieve. The mobilization of millions of women had proven that participation, not hierarchy, was the true engine of productivity. The collaboration between government, industry, and labor had shown that democracy could organize itself with the precision of an army, without surrendering its freedoms. It was, as Roosevelt had promised in 1940, the arsenal of democracy, a phrase that had once sounded like a metaphor, now made literal in steel and smoke. The lesson was clear. Totalitarian systems could command obedience, but they could not inspire creativity. They could force men to work, but not to innovate. The United States, by contrast, had turned imagination into policy. Its engineers, scientists, and workers had been free to adapt, improve, and challenge orders. Every rivet gun redesigned by a woman on the line, every engine improved by an engineer's midnight idea, became a small victory for liberty itself. The transformation also redefined the global balance of power. In 1939, America was a regional actor, cautious and insular. By 1945, it had become the industrial heart of the free world. Its navy spanned every ocean. Its air force dominated every sky. Its factories fed not only its own armies, but those of its allies. When Europe lay in ruins, American production became the lifeline of recovery. The same organizational machinery that had built bombers now built bulldozers, locomotives, and turbines. Under the Marshall Plan, American steel and machinery rebuilt bridges in France, railways in Italy, and power plants in Germany itself. The arsenal of democracy became the arsenal of reconstruction. In Germany, the lesson left a lasting scar. Post-war engineers studied the efficiency of American industry with awe and humility. The German Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle of the 1950s, was built not on conquest but on imitation, on applying the very industrial principles once dismissed as foreign and inferior. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Japan too adopted the model, transforming wartime defeat into a manufacturing renaissance. The blueprint for global modernization had been drawn not in battlefields, but in American factories. For the United States, the legacy endured in memory and in muscle. The men and women who had built the bombers, engines, and ships returned home as veterans of a different kind, a workforce that understood its own power. Many would go on to shape the post-war boom. Rosie the Riveter became a symbol of empowerment, and the GI Bill turned factory workers into engineers, pilots, and entrepreneurs. The same spirit of collaboration that had united government, science, and industry during the war would later send humans to the moon and build the digital world. The lineage from Willow Run to Silicon Valley runs through the idea that complex challenges can be solved by collective ingenuity. The arsenal of democracy had proven something larger than victory. It had shown that freedom, when organized and determined, could surpass tyranny not only in morality but in productivity. As for Göring, his end came swiftly. At Nuremberg, sentenced to death, he took his own life with cyanide hours before his execution. In his cell were found charts, production statistics, and fragments of interrogation notes, numbers he had studied obsessively, as if to find meaning in them. Among his final remarks to his interrogators was a bitter admission. Had we understood what America was building, we would never have started this war. Those words, spoken by the architect of Blitzkrieg, became a grim epitaph for the regime he served. The war that Germany began with ideology ended with a lesson in industry. Today, the ruins of Willow Run stand as both monument and memory. Where B-24 Liberators once thundered off the line, historians and engineers walk among the remnants of the world's most productive factory. The echoes of rivet guns and assembly lines have faded, but the legacy remains. A reminder that wars are not won by armies alone, but by nations capable of turning freedom into action. The arsenal of democracy was more than a slogan. It was proof that an open society, united by purpose, could outbuild empires and outlast tyrannies. It was the triumph of invention over oppression, of courage over coercion, of democracy over dictatorship. And when the final tally was written, not in rhetoric or ideology, but in the cold mathematics of production, it told a story for the ages, that, in the greatest struggle of the 20th century, liberty did not merely survive. It produced.